Calgary-Beddington.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Just like to start by thanking my colleague, the member for Calgary Varsity. It's always a real pleasure to hear her speak on the topic. She has, a lot of knowledge in the area. Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act. So what does Bill 6 do? And what it does is it proposes legislative measures that would create clear lines of authority related to public health decisions and affirms that people elected by Albertans should have discretionary authority to make the final decisions based on scientific and medical evidence during a public health situation, aligning how decisions were and should be made. I think we'll be agreeing to disagree on this one. The first thing I know when I saw this bill come up and I saw health, what I thought I was going to be seeing was maybe a bill that was going to, address the crisis in healthcare that we're seeing right now. Is this a bill that's going to be focused on how we recruit, train, and retain more doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals? And no, unfortunately, that's not really what we're seeing happen in this bill at all. Not been seeing that come forward in any bills actually addressing the issues, certainly not the issues that I'm hearing about in my constituency. I had a family doc come into my office last week. And she wanted to talk to me about, the issues that are facing her practice. She's been practicing in primary care, I believe it was 30 years, 25 or 30 years. And she said this is actually the worst that the crisis has been in primary care in her time practicing. She wanted to talk about the difficulties that there were filling the residency positions, especially compared to other provinces. Actually, I was talking to a couple different docs this morning, and they had an interesting fun fact, which was that, Saskatchewan was able to fill all those positions. So, they don't even have a better climate or mountains. Yeah, it's Saskatchewan. No mountains at all. So, and then, she wanted to talk about how one of the partners in her firm was retiring early. And it was really going to cause a big crisis in her practice. It's a small practice, it's just 4 or 5 docs. And the issue is that the young docs coming up, they're really not wanting to fill those positions in primary care. And so what is she to do? The business can't keep operating if she's not got enough docs in there. So these are the concerns certainly that I've been hearing from doctors when I'm talking to my constituents. That I live in a really established riding. I've got a lot of seniors, and so I hear a lot about knee replacements. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you to the member for the opportunity to speak. The member was just speaking of the challenges that we are facing with recruiting and indeed retaining family doctors here in the province of Alberta. I think I was at the same meeting this morning and those doctors spoke of the significant disruption that's been created under this government and how that's created so much uncertainty that's made it far more difficult to retain and recruit. I'm just wondering if the member feels that having a government that has the opportunity to gives itself the opportunity to exercise such sweeping power on public health, to make decisions that could run contrary to the recommendations of public health and indeed make their work potentially much more difficult, if she feels that's something that is going to improve that situation, make it easier for us to hold on to the medical professionals we have and indeed recruit the ones we need.
Thanks so much for popping up with that. I feel like maybe I was spending too much time on my constituency because I was getting there. I definitely do. I've got a section where I use the term peacocking. Right? Who do we want? Who do we want making this decision? Is it the peacocks or is it the docs? And for me, it's the docs. Absolutely. So yes, knee replacements. This is a huge thing that I hear about because, folks are waiting 2-4 years to get in on that. So again, Bill 6 is really not addressing any of these issues. It's not helping anyone find a family doctor. It's not recruiting new docs into the province. It's not addressing burnout with our healthcare professionals. So what is it doing? So this bill is a response to the Ingram decision. So that was issued July 31st of this year. Now, for those who aren't familiar, there was a case here that was brought to our courts by a plaintiff group, and that included 2 churches and a gym owner. This was interesting for me. I was, reflecting on the time during COVID. The churches that I was interacting with, they were more than happy to follow the public health orders. It was real interesting moving my in-laws onto the virtual for their church. That didn't come easily for them. But, all they wanted was to worship in community. And they were happy to move online to accommodate that. And I remember having a really long conversation with my neighbor. He's a pastor. And I remember asking him, about his church and how his church was managing this. And him telling me just, how important it was for them to protect the seniors in their congregation. So as I said, it was interesting for me to see that, churches were part of this original plaintiff group because, the churches I know and interact with, like I said, they really were, they were wanting to follow those measures. They were wanting to protect their congregations. So this plaintiff group, they filed a lawsuit. The argument was that the pandemic-related public health measures were contrary to Alberta's Bill of Rights and unlawfully breached people's rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, the judge's decision in this case was that any infringement that did happen on Alberta's rights were amply and demonstrably justified under the Charter due to the nature of the pandemic. Remember, pandemic, it's not a word that we throw around lightly. It's not a word that the health community throws around lightly. I've heard it described as a once-in-a-100-year pandemic. But the decision, it goes on to say, too, that Albertans facing charges for breaking pandemic-related laws should have those charges dropped because the health orders breached the Public Health Act. When I was looking at that, and again thinking about that, the 100-year pandemic, it was interesting to me that the government, they didn't go back to the data at that time. They didn't go back to the legislation. They didn't go back to the Public Health Act to do a refresher on where was the responsibility supposed to be, right? Who was making decisions? The reason that we were in this situation to begin with is that we had a government that wasn't following what the legislation laid out. That was what the judge was saying with her ruling there. Maybe they did. Maybe they did go back and review that, and maybe they knew full well, and it was just a real choice that they made to politicize a public health crisis. To politicize public health measures. Now, from my perspective, the public health strategy was pretty clear at the time. It was to limit the spread while we waited for vaccines to be developed so that people could be protected, right? Protected from this once-in-a-100-year pandemic. And I asked myself, what was it that people needed at that time, right? In a time of crisis, did they need the peacocking politicians, or did we need doctors, right? Did we need experts to step up and tell us how to best manage this, right? How to minimize the damage that could be done on a population with a pandemic like this. And I did actually, I went and checked on, just a little curious, what Canada's death rate was like compared to some other countries. And I'll just draw your attention to a couple of examples of some countries that didn't manage this pandemic very well. One of them is Hungary. Now, Hungary suffered over 4,000 deaths per million, and this was a country where it was the peacocks, not ducks, right, that were making those decisions. And they suffered the second highest death rate in the world. Another example, Montenegro. Now, this is a country that is very reliant on tourism, right? And so, despite, avoiding a lot of the negative outcomes really early on, they did make decisions, to open their economy back up, to allow folks in. And they ended up in the same boat as Hungary. They ended up with 4,000 deaths per million, okay? And if you're wondering, in Canada, it was 1,000 per million, okay? So 4 times. So these countries where it was peacocks, not ducks, we had 4 times the death rate. So if you look at Canada, rather than 42,000 deaths, we would have suffered 168,000 deaths. So that would be 126,000 additional Canadians, grandparents, parents, friends, who wouldn't be with us today, right, if that was the path we wanted to go down. I wanted to go back to this article too. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I will table this article tomorrow. CBC article, November 2nd, 2023. Alberta government tables bill to clarify decision-making during public health emergencies.
Be quiet.
And there was a quote in here that I'll just read to you. According to Minister of Justice and Attorney General Mickey Amery, this new legislation will ensure that elected officials make decisions and are held accountable for them. And he says, elected officials have a responsibility to act in the best interest of Albertans and swear an oath to duly and faithfully execute the powers and trust imparted. This legislation ensures that final decision-making...
Order. Just ask members to keep their private conversations significantly more private so that we can hear the honourable member from Calgary-Beddington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This legislation ensures that final decision-making authority and the accountability that must come with it rest with those entrusted by Albertans. And that actually got me thinking about, that responsibility to act, and then thinking about, doctors and what their responsibility is, where that lies. And so I want to share something with you, and again, I will table this in the Assembly tomorrow. A modernized version of, but I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the Hippocratic Oath, in which a doctor would say, I swear to fulfill to the best of my ability and judgment this covenant, to respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk, and gladly share such knowledge, as is mine, with those who are to follow. I will apply, for the benefit of the sick, all measures that are required, avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment and therapeutic nihilism. I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. I will not be ashamed to say I know not, nor will I fail to call in my colleagues when the skills of another are needed for a patient's recovery. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given to me to save a life, all thanks, but it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play at God. I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being whose illness may affect the person's family and economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems if I am to care adequately for the sick. I will prevent disease whenever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to my fellow human beings Those
I
sound
hesitate to interrupt and do apologize to the honourable member.